Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen O'Brien, and I'm Vice-Chancellor of Durham University, and I want to welcome you to this event entitled Culture and Knowledge, Growing Opportunities in the North East of England. The event is part of a national series entitled Up North, which is spearheaded by the N8 Research Partnership. N8 is a group of 8 research-intensive universities across the North East and North West of England, and also in collaboration with the Royal Society of Arts. And I'm really proud to say I've been a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts for many years, and I know a great deal about its founding history in the 18th century, and it was founded as a body designed to connect knowledge, creative arts and prosperity in one synchronized agenda, and it's still promoting that agenda in a modernized, more inclusive way. But I think it's absolutely right that we have that partnership with this particular series. The series' tagline is innovative thinking from the North to unlock a more prosperous future for all. And for Durham's event, we've decided to focus on how culture, creativity and heritage, combined with world-class research and knowledge, can have a genuinely beneficial impact on less urban places like County Durham. Durham University and the N8 can convene groups of thinkers and doers who might not otherwise necessarily meet outside larger cities, with culture being the connective tissue between them. And I also feel that as someone who leads a university, there's a huge opportunity for us as a university and the many colleagues I have from Durham and from Newcastle and Northumbria and other universities in the room to really think about how we can play our part in culture-led ongoing regeneration in the North East. I think we learned a great deal through our participation in the Durham City of Culture bid. We lost out to Bradford, as you know, but we actually still are, as I can sense in this room today, actually still are living in the afterglow of the excitement that collaboration brought about. So just by way of preliminaries, I want to give you 4 C's in terms of what I think the universities can bring to this particular partnership. And we'll hear more from the rest of our very distinguished panel about what they bring from their respective areas. So universities are undoubtedly custodians of cultural heritage and knowledge. We have 70,000 books in our library that predate 1850 alone, museums and many assets, and a wonderful World Heritage Site. And in terms of the tourist economy, we add about £5 million per annum to the local economy. We are, of course, as we are today, conveners. I think universities have nice facilities and we have a degree of stability and continuity that allows us to play a convening role in these very important conversations about growing opportunities through culture. We're definitely content creators. That's the way in which we use new knowledges to come up with new ways of inhabiting and thinking about culture. And we're also amazing communities, particularly communities of students as well as staff. And so much of the innovation in the cultural space and the knowledge space comes from our amazing students. And we can bring all of those together. And I think we genuinely have an important role to play. So as I mentioned, we have an eclectic panel and we're going to introduce everybody very soon. We will have plenty of time for questions and answers. I know that a number of you have been to an afternoon event, and so the conversation is rolling forward from some very interesting discussions that you've had this afternoon. The audio from the talk is being recorded and will be edited into a podcast after the event. So thank you for coming, enjoy the discussion, and I really look forward to hearing what everyone has to say. Thank you.
Hello, can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. My name is Jen Williams. I'm the Northern correspondent at the Financial Times, and I'm delighted to be here and delighted to see so many people in attendance this evening for what will hopefully be a really illuminating discussion. As Karen said, this is the latest in a series of events that I've been chairing in different towns and university towns and cities across the north, looking at the different aspects of the opportunities we have in Northern England, particularly where the deep-seated regional divides we know about in this country are concerned, and what we can do from different perspectives to try and capitalise on what we know we have in the north of England. And we couldn't have picked a better place to discuss culture and knowledge, or a better moment on the day that the North East devolution deal has been laid before Parliament, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that very soon. And indeed, a big year in terms of elections as well. And we couldn't have picked a better panel either, but I'll come to them in a second. Just very briefly, how this evening is going to run. We will start with a panel discussion on a range of broad topics on this theme, which is obviously quite broad, so it could go in a number of different directions. And then we will go to a Q&A from the floor. Faye and Ikra are in the audience somewhere. I saw you before. Yes, they will have microphones. So they will be roaming around, and I'll probably take questions in twos or threes. And a couple of bits of housekeeping. I would appeal for questions rather than comments. As anyone who's ever chaired a panel will know. Otherwise, I will kind of gently cut you short. So please don't take offence if I do that. Could everyone please put their phones on silent? Because last time I chaired one of these was in Morecambe in December. I didn't. So please do that. And so I will turn to our panel, starting from the far left, Professor Giorgio Fazio, Professor of Macroeconomics at Newcastle University, Research Director of the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre. Nick Maylan, he's the Chief Executive of Red Hills Durham Miners Association, fantastic community asset that reaches out to former mining communities and also preserves the heritage that is the wonderful heritage that is already there. Karen, who you have already heard from, Vice Chancellor of Durham University. To my right, Professor Katie Shaw, Programme Director, AHRC Creative Communities, and Director of University Cultural Partnerships at Northumbria University. Dr. Henry Kippin, Chief Executive of the North Tyne Combined Authority and Interim Chief Executive of the North East Mayoral Combined Authority. And last but not least, Councillor Elizabeth Scott, Portfolio Holder for Economy and Partnerships at Durham Council. So please could you give the panel a welcome. Okay, so I'm going to start with something that will be up Henry's street, I think, which is more on the theme of devolution. So I think I'm right in saying that, you can give an exposition on this, but obviously the North East devolution deals, it's a big deal for the North East. It's also a big deal in terms of the general kind of landscape on this stuff. And I think it has culture running through it, right? So, I'm wondering how much of a big deal culture and knowledge economy and all of this stuff is to that, and how much of an opportunity is devolution in that respect?
So, yes, big and huge is the answer.
Okay, we're done.
No, so I've got to say a little bit more, if only to restate the point of celebration of the evening, which is that the order for the North East devolution deal is laid in Parliament today. So for anybody who follows these journeys, and I would forgive you if you didn't, because it's a bit of a sausage machine from signing a deal to getting anything done and having an election. Today, the order is laid in Parliament, which means the region can't go, we've changed our mind, and neither can government. So we are heading towards a mayoral election in May, where a North East mayor will be elected, and we will, I suppose, start to fill out the first part of the answer, really, which is about coming together as a region from the bottom end of Durham to the Scottish border to say we stand for something, we want to do something bigger and bolder in terms of our economy and how that works together, and we want to do that in a way that fits a modern version of what this region is. And actually, if you play that through, you'll find lots and lots of content in that deal and lots of willingness to push forward on areas of industrial growth, clean energy, advanced manufacturing, look at our investment zones, full of that stuff, getting EVs from Nissan exported across the rest of the world. But you'll also find a huge focus on culture as the thing that both knits the region together in identity terms, which is really important to devolution. It's not just about economics, it's about shared identity in a region, and also a recognition of how much culture drives the economy and how important that will be in the future, both in terms of the size and scope of the cultural industries in the region, but also the relevance of those industries to everything else. So yes, definitely and huge is the answer.
Yes, definitely huge. And Katie, this is very much something that you've been involved in working on. I mean, how essential, I guess, is culture in particular, I guess, to where the North East goes next under a kind of new devolved landscape?
It's core, really. I mean, culture is both the blessing and the curse when it comes to devolution, because it has so many opportunities to it, but also inherently lots of challenges. And I think that, the beauty of devolution is if we get it right, it's an opportunity to own our own narrative and own our own direction and agency and tell new stories about who we want to be in the future as a region. If we get it wrong, it's an opportunity to reproduce the same structural inequalities that have not worked previously, right? And that have created all the barriers. And culture is possibly the most kind of febrile site for this at the moment. But if we see the culture of the Northeast as an asset, and we look at the way in which it's being framed in the Devo deal, it's very much as being about inclusive growth and a really good model of how we can operationalize inclusive growth for everyone, from access to representation to that classic C of content creation and what it means to reindustrialize our Northeast through culture and the creative industries, whether that's mobilizing our heritage assets like Durham Cathedral or our new assets like the Fulwell 73 studios, hopefully in Sunderland very soon. It's about thinking about how we can bring together culture and the creative industries to create a new kind of knowledge economy, and one that's actually focused on innovation as well and looking forward.
And Georgia, I mean, obviously, your economics is one of your key things. How important is culture within your view of how the Northeast economy goes forward? How central is it?
So first of all, culture is essential to everything, even in economic models. So I like to emphasize as an economist, we often, we are often criticized for forgetting such things, but actually even in economics models, culture is quite essential to everything. And culture is generated in the place. It tends to be generated in places, contaminated, of course, from outside place, but it's really important to remember that it is generated in place and characterizes the place and defines its future development. Sometimes actually it can work in the other direction. It can become a trap if you don't have enough culture in a place. By culture, of course, we need to define what we mean by culture, because it can mean many things. In economics, very often it is the social fabric. Very often it's the traits that individuals and communities share that make things possible when you want to do socialized activities like public investment, for example. Now, in terms of what Katie was saying, I would like to add and emphasize what she was saying, but also reinforce and say that it's important to link the culture and creative industries, if you want to use this broader hat in this context, with the other part of the economy. I think the massive opportunity here is that there are already very strong traditional sectors. These are very difficult to find somewhere else. So there is an emerging creative industries activity. There are emerging creative activities that are really flourishing. The combination of the two, I think, can really regenerate and spark a new types of innovations. I think that's and the new productivity. I think that's for me the key, bringing together the traditional and the new sectors, I think.
And Nick, I mean, are you hoping that the devolution deal and the direction that things are going in terms of decentralisation, which each government is kind of pushing slowly towards, can you see that being helpful to the kind of endeavours that you're doing in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a great tradition of representative decision making within our own communities in County Durham, in the Durham Coalfield in particular. The historic Miners Hall, Red Hills, is sometimes known as the Pitman's Parliament for that exact reason. A seat for every colliery, but a voice for every community, and collective decision making, not just about matters of industry, but about matters of welfare and well-being. So, we talk a lot about cultural industries and assets. The thing for me that's really powerful is that we've got this asset of a model that used to exist within living memory of how we would fund theatre groups in pit villages. And one of the things about the City of Culture journey that we've been on has been about ensuring that there's connectivity and ensuring, or at least aspiring to connectivity. We're not there yet, but aspiring to ensuring that there's connectivity between those places so that there can be decisions made at that hyper-local level as well as at that regional level.
And Karen, I mean, I just wondered if you wanted to expand, I suppose, on the role of higher education within what happens next in the North East, because it's a kind of new world that the area is about to move into.
Well, we think we have a very big role to play, and we're working very closely with Henry and with the other universities in the region, and my fellow Vice-Chancellor from Northumbria, Andy Long, who's here this evening, and representatives from Newcastle University to make that happen, because we clearly in economic terms understand that we are anchor institutions, and that we have a huge role in terms of an R&D driven economy in the region to play. And we already play that role pretty well, and we collaborate pretty closely, but there's clearly enormous potential to do that. We also understand that we have an enormous role to play around educational uplift, and that rates of progression to higher education are very low in this region. But I think to go to Nick's point, sort of thinking about this issue of kind of democratic deficit and the democratic history that you're particularly bringing back to life through the Red Hills project. I think we have a huge role to play in a wider educational mission, because certainly Durham University used to do a lot more in terms of extension education, adult education skills, all of that kind of thing around socializing a greater sense of democratic ownership and engagement in the region. And some of that is by empowering people through education and understanding some of the histories and some of the traditions. But it's just great, actually, that sort of democratic history that you allude to is being placed front and centre in the regeneration, the cultural regeneration of the region. So I could go on a very great length, actually, in terms of what I think universities can do in this whole devolution landscape. We're very excited about it. And we also understand that there is something about just massing our combined might, power, and educational heft, and seeing how we can really make that work for regional prosperity, and how we can really make that play into the sort of cultural traditions that we can draw upon and the heritage that we have here.
And Liz, I was just, from a Durham point of view, what the point of devolution, I guess, is that you're able to do things differently to how they might have otherwise happened, right? So you have the opportunity to set different priorities and the opportunity to shape things differently. And I wondered what that kind of looks like from a Durham perspective. Like, what does it enable you potentially to do?
Yeah, and we're also very excited that the deal is sealed today. So it's been a good day in that respect. But also to mention, and some people will be aware of this, that Durham has the interim lead portfolio for culture, creativity, tourism and sport. So we kind of at the very forefront of what is going to happen through the devolution process in this arena. And I think from Durham's perspective, perhaps culture has been a little bit left behind for a long time, or has been looked at as a backward kind of facing opportunity. And I think what we need to do now, and what we are doing, is very much changing that narrative to it being a forward-looking opportunity. Very much has been said about it being place-based, that we have so much to offer, so much rich heritage here. And I think the other thing that we have to be very mindful of as public sector bodies is that nobody owns culture, and that we've got a very important role to play in facilitation and enabling and all of those things. But from a local authority and from a devolved authority point of view, we don't have any ownership. We have to be very clear about that. But it's our position is very much that culture-led regeneration is probably our biggest opportunity to make a step change in the North East. So that we are intending and are very ambitious in that regard.
There's something that Nick said then that I thought was really interesting about Red Hills actually being a thing that has already worked in the past, right? And I'm just interested to know, what the panel think about, what has worked. If there's one thing that you've seen in terms of culture or the knowledge economy or higher education, there's lots of different ways to kind of cut this, but what thing has been already tried that has kind of worked that you would like to see more of, whether that's something that can be decided by decision makers across the North East footprint or by communities or even by central government. But, Katie, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I guess there's quite a few examples of things that have started off at very local level interventions and then gone on to be scaled by other combined authorities. And in a way, I think that possibly because all of our combined authorities are evolving at different rates, it feels like a very kind of snakes and ladders board at the moment. And they're evolving with different powers, which means it's really tricky to kind of compare and contrast, because some people literally can do things that others can't at the moment, and have powers that others don't. But the good practice that we've seen largely centres around collaboration and co-creation with communities. It is about embedding that kind of approach to everything you do and embedding collaboration from inception. So programs around culture that are co-designed, that are co-delivered, that are co-evaluated, and they're cross-sector. So suddenly culture is everybody's responsibility and everybody's opportunity. And through doing that, you genuinely unlock value, you unlock the benefit of it, you extend access and reach and representation. So I think when I've seen it work best, it's done cross-sector, but that really helps with things like City of Culture bids, because there's a huge amount of evidence for our colleagues from Durham and also Sunderland and others that the so-called silver cities actually come out of this better, because when you get City of Culture, the circus comes to town at Leeds and a lot of the momentum leads with it. Whereas actually, if you're a silver city, you often have to use the parachute money to create a sustainable ecosystem around what you wanted to achieve anyway. And then that builds momentum into the long term.
Have you been struck by the legacy that just doing the bid in the first place has left?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was in an odd position at the time because we're still working with Bradford, so slightly enemy territory here. But I think having gone on to sit on the City of Culture Roundtable since, and seeing Hull and seeing Bradford and seeing Coventry as well, what works well is when you get the whole every sector around the table, because then everybody becomes responsible and invested and has skin in the game. Yeah. When it becomes a one-off event, like we saw with Unboxed, like we often see with the Festival of the North and all that kind of thing, it's there and it's gone. And it actually doesn't impact communities. So I think if you start off by thinking about how you get that cross-sector representation from inception, that's when you get the proper value unlocked from these events.
Yeah, and it's the thing Liz is saying about it's not just being like a public sector thing to own and do, right? Yeah.
You've got to leave a private sector investment to make it sustainable.
Yeah.
So I really heartily agree with that. And I think to go back to one of Liz's points, we don't want a combined authority to become a Death Star that arrives in the region and then publicly administers everything. Please don't quote me on that.
I haven't taken the shorthand answer.
It's a real shame this is being filmed, because I'll probably have to wind back on that one. I can't see any of the mayoral candidates proposing a Death Star.
Well, no, Andy Burnham's transport plan. It was kind of Death Star. Yeah.
The point that I attempted to make there, not very well, is a similar point about how you as a combined authority convene. So convening, amplifying, celebrating, being able to work with the grain of what works well in a region and give that some real voice and give that some real scale. That doesn't mean turning up in the public sector doing everything, or a mayor doing everything. The critical thing about devolution is that it feels like a collaboration. It feels like the regions and not just the public sectors. And I think we're well aware of that as we head into this next few months.
Yeah, picking up on the City of Culture bid and the process, I mean, I was very heavily involved with that, with a number of people in this room. And the energy from that continues to really grow and thrive. And we've been fortunate enough to be awarded Place Partnership through Arts Council England now in County Durham. And we see that as a real key to the next stage for the county and how we continue with that legacy. We just agreed as a local authority to set up a culture trust to really maximise cultural assets and what we can do with those. We have had a very successful partnership in County Durham called Culture Durham for a lot of years, but we're now ramping that up to the next level and looking at how we kind of let it sail away a little bit in terms of get an independent chair and have some real power and influence within the Culture Durham partnership. So some really great things that, like somebody said this, but City of Culture might have been a distraction. We might not have worked so hard to make these other things happen in terms of legacy if we'd been so focused on the event.
And from the university perspective, I mean, I guess the crux of the question is what's worked that you would like to see more of?
Well, I'm still relatively new to the region, so I come with kind of fresh eyes, but probably a lack of history, and I miss things out. But I've been very impressed by the Auckland project. And the festivals and the things that go on around the Auckland project. But we have a particular bit of that working with our archaeology department on community archaeology. It's, obviously it's academic led, but it's highly participatory, and the byproduct is skills, engagement, getting outside, building confidence in how knowledge of material culture can be accessed in that way. So that's one kind of work example that's really impressed me. I'm endlessly impressed by Beamish, because they told me, they came to see me the other day, the chair and the CEO, that they get 800,000 visitors a year. So whatever Beamish does, that's twice as many as the cathedral, by the way. It's absolutely awesome. And it isn't, of course it's backward looking to our regional coal mining heritage, but it manages to make that into a much broader social history that's still a lived history and history of practice. What I would like to see more of, what I have seen elsewhere, is a broader understanding, and forgive me if I've missed things, around how domestic practice, lived culture in domestic settings or wherever we may be, is also culture. So I would say the particular example I would say is around food. So food practices, things that you eat, things that you cook, things that you share, because culture is always shared, are actually fundamental parts of cultural practice and evolving cultural awareness. And we could still, I think Janice and I were talking, my Dean for Humanities, we were talking today about what more could we do around food in particular. But it could also be around clothing, or it could be a whole range of practices that actually evolve, bind us together, and we could find a more explicit way of talking about. And the university bit is always to provide a bit of the background and a bit of the material history, or whatever it might be. And it's the role of the community to make that lived practice, not just an academic exercise in heritage. So there's a lot more to understand about the Northeast, and a lot more we can celebrate and develop. And I know that's going to be part of the Red Hills project, but it's exciting to go to places like Beamish for a relative newcomer and see how that comes alive.
I'll come back to Red Hills in a moment, because that's where we started the question. But Georgia, I mean, from an economist's perspective, I guess, we hear a lot about cultural-led regeneration. I hear it pop up all the time in my job. This thing is going to have this massive impact on this particular place. Where have you seen it really work? Where have you seen it help turn the dial? Or are there examples, not necessarily, it might not necessarily be in the Northeast, but things that have worked where you think that you can take lessons from that and do more of that?
So I think it's difficult to point to a specific example. We know the role plays an incredible role in fostering local regeneration for many reasons. Sometimes you need to have a spark or something exotic happening. This story of the city of culture is a bit of an example, because even the silver effect that Katie was talking about, because without that competition, probably people will not join forces and come together and learn about each other. So in places where you tend to have segmentation, where people are kind of separated, it's difficult for them to join forces together. Then this particular event eventually led people to talk to each other, and then start a process of cultural regeneration, if you like, and all the things that we are talking about. Clearly, universities played a key enabling role. There are lots and lots of examples, I think, around the world of situations where culture has helped regenerate urban areas, for example, deprived urban areas. This has sometimes been associated with negative effects, for example, like gentrification. Some recent evidence that we have produced as the papers that come out as creative effect discussion papers have shown that there isn't such a great effect, for example, on gentrification. So the positive urban regeneration effects generated by culture, the presence of artists, the
can you not hear very clearly? Are you? Is it?
Sorry, is it just me? Because I'm.
No. It's up to us to sort it out.
It's
honestly.
more likely me because of my accent.
That's his mic.
I think. Do you just need to move your mic a bit closer, maybe? Just that would help.
Is this any better?
Brilliant.
Okay. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what I was saying is that there are, I think, several examples around the globe at small scale where culture has been able to regenerate urban areas, and this has often been implemented actively by councils. And you have also notable examples of philanthropists or entrepreneurs setting up new museums in specific places, and this then leading to cultural regeneration. I can speak for an example that comes from my hometown. I'm from Italy, and in my hometown, an art collector coming from who had a collection in Milan and in London decided to move to Palermo, a city in Sicily, which is clearly a region that, in terms of income per capita, is clearly similar in terms of position to the richer parts of the country. When you look at the Northeast, for example, and he's brought his collection to the city. It's a massive collection. He has refurbished an entire historical building. He has labs in the building for local artists to work and to learn new skills. He's bringing back skills that have been lost over centuries. So this theme of, there can be something exogenous, but it can spark something magic in local places. This is not possible without the support of all the other institutions, I think, in that place.
Well, I was just going to add, actually, the thing that strikes me about some of these kind of big cultural regeneration things that have then turned out to be successful is that they often require somewhere or someone to take a risk, right? And there's sometimes a kind of feeling that when those decisions are being made hundreds of miles away, that doesn't necessarily happen. Or I've seen examples of places say, we would like to have this thing, or we think this institution could be based here, and we're going to throw everything in with that because we really believe that it's going to happen. And you almost end up in a position where it's kind of mocked a bit because, like, well, why would you have that there? How could it possibly work in that place? And then actually, because those people kind of took the risk at some point and stuck with it and were brave, you eventually end up with something, 10 or 15 or 20 years down the line. And everyone's like, why would anyone have ever thought that this wouldn't have worked? But actually it required a degree of bravery. I mean, is that fair from where you sit?
It's pretty fair. And I think that, for a sector that's had a very survival mindset recently coming out of COVID and is now going from like surviving to thriving, we've suffered from a range of emergency funds, fair enough, that were administered centrally, like cultural recovery. But then we've progressed into things like Cultural Development Fund, we've progressed into Arts Council funding. And they haven't necessarily proved fit for purpose for Devo because we're still having to be forced to compete with each other as regions. Even things like City of Culture, we're still having to compete internally within our region for various bids. We're not really rewarding collaboration in this system. And when we think about projects that work, they bring together what we might call unlikely allies around the table, because lots of our cultural and creative institutions and organizations are superheroes, right? They operate perfectly well on their own. They do some amazing stuff. But when they come together, it's like the Avengers assemble. They are like so much more than the sum of their parts. But you need to reward them. Right? You need to motivate them to get together because currently the funding system doesn't motivate people to take risks. It does in tech. It definitely does in tech. It does in finance. It does in health. If people fail in our other disciplines, it's like, oh, okay, that's fail joy, right? We learn from that. We'll move on. If you fail in culture, you're not getting funded again. And we need to adopt some of that and take it into our own discipline.
Do you want to come back in?
Yeah. So just back to the question of what from the past has worked. I think so. Something I think we have to be really careful about. I understand it from an economic perspective, but narratives around gentrification at potentially the expense of local development. Something that really, really worked in County Durham in the past was that we had a sense of entitlement to culture. It was part of the fabric of our world. It was what we, it is still what culture is what we eat, we breathe. But I can see Alison from Blackwall in the audience there. Blackwall has still 4 stages for performance in it, but none of them have been built in the last 2 generations. We had at that point a sense of what Sid Chaplin, the author, called do-it-yourself communities. We were entitled to this stuff, so we created it for ourselves. So Spennymoor Settlement, for example, was hand-built brick by Durham miners. We did this for ourselves. And at that hyper-local level, we have to continue to be do-it-yourself communities. And I think from an economic perspective, absolutely, we have to have that new investment. It's really, really helpful when somebody comes in and says, I'm interested in this place and I want to bring something that you might never have imagined. But it has to work at a level that supports local infrastructure. And the thing that I think we are learning, but maybe still aren't quite there at, again, post-City of Culture, but part of a sort of broader journey, is confidence in who we are and confidence in our culture and confidence that actually we can not have to compete against each other for Great Exhibition of the North. Because actually, that's not how Scotland manages its finances when it comes to culture. Scotland has a plan that reflects its identity as a place made up of this breadth of places and identities and heritage. We need the same in the north, but we absolutely need the same in the northeast, where there's been a lack of, there's a sense of equity that has, I think, been eroded in terms of those resources, but those platforms in Blackwall are still there. We have to make sure that the conditions are right for people to perform on them.
Did you want to come in? Yeah, I just want to say something about collaboration and competition, in that I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. I think you can have a healthy competition mindset, but also collaborate. And an example comes to mind when I was quite young and naive and green. A much older, wiser friend of mine who had a restaurant in Durham City, a successful restaurant, another restaurant came next door. And I was like, I don't know about that. I said, are you worried? He said, no. He said, it's brilliant. He said, it keeps me on my toes. And he said, and if people think there's lots of good restaurants in that street, they're going to come to that street, aren't they? And I thought, that's so right. And I think it's the same in cultural and creative industries, that the more we have, the more chance we have of people thinking, actually, that's a really great place. So I do think you've got to have that little spark of competition in a healthy way and managed in a healthy way. And I see that across the Northeast, actually, with people more and more being open to collaborating, even when they're in competition. And I think that's what we have to really focus on and achieve.
And confidence to do that. So part of what devolution is about, if you take a step back, is shifting the default mindset. I've lost count of the amount of conversations I've had in Whitehall over the years. I'm sure there's loads of people in the audience would share this, that kind of go, oh, yeah, it'd be really interesting to do what you're just proposing, whether it's relocate this thing to the regions or change the way things work. But, well, we're not sure if it's going to work. So how do we really know this is going to work? And my response is usually, well, I'll tell you what, I can give you reams of what doesn't, and that's the way we do things currently. So let's shift the starting point. And so if devolution is going to work in this region, and indeed in any other, we have to have the confidence to say, this is where we want to be. This is what we want. This is the degree of investment we're going to put behind it. You meet us halfway now. It's a completely different mindset for the region to be in, to be able to look 30 years ahead and say, there. And that's really fundamental, not only in this sector that we're talking about, but more broadly, to have that slightly chest out confidence and say, we've now got a vehicle to start thinking on that basis. It's really important.
It's a less infantilized relationship with government as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask the negative version of that question, which is, okay, so we've talked a little bit about what has worked and what we could do more of. Where are the barriers at the moment? And I realise there are
there's going to be a number, but there are always barriers to moving forward, aren't there? But, I mean, to pick up where you left off, what are the kind of obstacles that need to be overcome? I mean, not specific necessarily to devolution, but just in general, if the North East is going to take all of these opportunities that are kind of swimming around in the morass, like what are the current obstacles?
So if you look at the region, if we're going to be truthful about where the region is, and you look at all of the statistics from its economy to its social economy and its social infrastructure, you'll find we are top of some league tables you really do want to be top of. FDI numbers last year, for example, ahead of London, absolutely incredible. Brilliant job by everybody in the region to make that true. We're also top of quite a few league tables you don't want to be top of in terms of some educational outcomes, certainly health inequalities and how they play out within the region. We've heard a version of that. To me, we have to get over a fundamental barrier, which is addressing those things requires join up. It requires decisions to be made closer to people in the region. Otherwise, you are always going to be, in effect, creating silos where you spend public money on health there, you spend money on culture there, you regenerate the economy through private money there, and these things aren't joined together. So the whole point of devolution is to give us the ability really to start taking decisions in the round and think about how transport enables skills, enables housing, enables culture and growth, and do that in the round. So for my honest view is that fundamental barrier we start to edge at through the devolution deal and the journey we're on. I feel quite confident we can start to take some steps, and ultimately you need to get to where Nick described, which is that the region becomes almost like a mini version of Scotland in terms of how its relationship with Whitehall and its freedom to make decisions that are right for the region. That's where we need to go in the long term.
Through all of you talked about there is that you had a sense of entitlement to culture in the past. I mean, what's been lost, I guess, or where are the obstacles at this juncture?
Yeah, I think County Durham in particular, the Durham Coalfield, sort of our patch, as it were. It's fair to say we've been through a canny bit in the last 2-3 generations, and I think what I sense is a sort of erosion that's taking place from sort of the introduction of Category D policies in County Durham in the 1950s through to the closure of the pits, through to deindustrialisation. And the sense of confidence I'm sort of describing, I think, is that there's enough time passed almost that we now have a sense of perspective on deindustrialisation that allows us to be proud of that heritage in the way that we presented at Beamish, presented at Red Hills or whatever, and be really proud of the things that work in communities that maybe we haven't shone a spotlight on until recently. The thing the barrier, to get to the answer, I think is equity. And some of the conversations we've had in the last few weeks, I can see with people in the room here from the arts sector, are about what do equitable relationships look like when resources are not equitable. And we can aspire to equitable resources, but that's not the reality we live within. So we have to start from a position of values.
Fair enough. And Giorgio, on an economic level, I mean, I spend a lot of my time at the Financial Times being presented with data showing, exactly what you were just describing there in the data relating to the economic performance in all kinds of different ways of different parts of the UK, with very often the North East struggling in those league tables, depending on the indicator. I think we know broadly many of the drivers for that, and we know about the fact the role that deindustrialisation has had to play in that. But when you look now at how the North East moves forward, how it tries to kind of level the playing field, we talked about equity. What are the key things standing in its way? And have you got optimism on behalf of the North East that some of those can be overcome? Because we are in a difficult landscape, aren't we, at the moment, nationally, internationally?
So it is difficult for us also to listen to hear the panelists, actually. So that's why sometimes we turn around. Apologies. So is there optimism? I come from the dismal science, so it's sometimes it's difficult to. I think there are long-term trends that have shaped the state where we are. The UK has become one of the most unequal countries in terms of spatial disparities, and the Northeast and other parts of the UK are in not a very good starting position. But not being in a good starting position provides opportunity to improve. When we talk about things that have not worked, I think there are a lot of things that we can think that have not worked and barriers that are existing. We know also there are important assets when we talk about knowledge, R&D, universities. Universities are a massive equalizer because they were not generated in the last, many of the universities we were talking about, they were not generated 100 years ago. They were generated a lot longer ago when there were no inequalities that we observed. So they actually level up the playing field a lot. So this kind of investment is important. So the role of the public sector is important. Now, things that haven't worked. For me, it is really strange, the lack of representation at the regional level that has characterized the UK over the last few decades. I would say England more than the UK. So you can point to Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland as different from some of the peripheral regions of England, for example. So my hope is that the devolution deal will bring this kind of representation to the region. Now, the challenge is to move away from thinking of devolution as a way to be represented in Whitehall to being able to do proper planning and what needs to be done. And that is a big, big challenge. Because if there hasn't been any discourse in the place, bottom up, and it's very difficult for high-level policies to emerge. And then there is the additional challenge of being able to have the appropriate data and evidence in support of those policies at the local level. So I think that is, I do have optimism. I live here. I'm growing. My kids are growing here, so I'm really an optimist. I mean, I think by choice, I really have hope. I believe in the future of the region. I think it will take a lot in terms of adjustment of national versus local discourse. But I think if we want to start from what we can control, not things that we cannot control, it really starts here. Maybe even from this panel, if you think about it, these discussions that we are having, I think are very critical to the future determination of the Northeast.
It's a kind of standalone question, really, but I'm interested to know what the panel think about the how helpful it is when national cultural institutions do decide to relocate out of London and pop up in the north of England. Some people see that as a bit tokenistic. Some people see it as actually being something that over time acts as a catalyst. I'm sure it depends on the cultural institution. I'll start with you, Katie.
Oh, wow. So there's a backstory here. I don't think I'm on the E&O's Christmas card list, let's put it that way. They released their winged monkeys for me. I think the so-called North Shoring of national organisations has been presented as something that is new and as part of devolution. It's not. We already have really well-established relationships with our national cultural organisations in the Northeast. You know, we've got the RSC in Newcastle, we've got the National Theatre in Sunderland, we've got the National Gallery displaying Constable in the shopping centre in South Shields. We're doing all this really clever, innovative stuff with national organisations anyway. And that was before they even got rewarded for doing it by Arts Council for daring to step out of London to do anything. So now they've been incentivised. And again, you need that incentivisation to form those relationships. More of that's going on. But the worst possible model is where you lift and shift a national organisation somewhere where, again, central government tells it where it should go, or there's a really odd bidding process, and then it's imposed on the city region. That is not good for anyone. And I think the E&O situation was such that they'd been warned several times by Arts Council that they needed to devolve their activity out of London and didn't. And then there was this big intervention. And it wasn't good for them, and it certainly wasn't good for Arts Council. But I'd hope that through devolution, you know, if you look at Arts Council's approach to devolution, like many of the AOBs, like Historic England as well, they say they want to work hand in hand with people like Henry, okay, and his portfolio holders to help them write the culture parts of the devolution deals, to help deliver them. because it's only through having better informed Arts Council officers, Historic England advisors, that they're going to be out in our communities, knowing what it's like on the ground and knowing our community's needs and assets, because too often we don't have an assets-based approach. We have a sense that, local priority areas are areas of need. They're not, they're areas of opportunity. That's how you frame it.
Katie, I know a lot less about this than you do, but I'm aware of what's happened in Dundee with the V&A and the Tate years ago in Liverpool. And I think we have seen some quite spectacular decentering of London. I mean, it's de-Londonizing of national institutions. I mean, let's just re-describe what's happening. These are national assets. They've been concentrated in a particular part of the country, and now they're being legitimately repatriated and redistributed. And actually, many of the British Museum's holdings, they relate to the phenomenal culture of the North. And just as we might talk about the Elgin marbles, we might also talk about the Lewis chess set and a whole variety. So I'm just asking you to. Is that the whole story? Because we know that these great national institutions have more in their storage than they could ever conceivably display, and turns out some of it gets stolen if it's not properly curated. And we know that there are things that there's you often need a philanthropist or a big investment, but there are things that follow from these quite high profile relocations or redistributions. And we're probably talking about two related things. One is inward tourism and repositioning and redefining a culture region. And I think we've got a massive opportunity to do that in the Northeast, because I think we already have an intrinsic understanding of the Northeast as a culture region. We don't have to invent it. But I think, British Museum of the North wouldn't go amiss in Newcastle, and Newcastle has rather a small art gallery. And so maybe I'm just being devil's advocate, Katie, because I don't quite see that's wholly a negative way to think about how national assets, which have been concentrated and collected principally in the southeast, shouldn't be redistributed to other parts of the country.
No, I think it's very true. Hence the example of the Constable in South Shields and the RSC in Newcastle. That is how you redistribute culture. Because even something like musicals, right? Musicals are prohibitively expensive for people to get to now. And that is the case that if you want to go and see Wicked, it's 135 quid a ticket at Sunderland Empire. And it's actually cheaper for some people to get on the train and go and see it in London. So just moving stuff doesn't necessarily mean you enhance the access to it. There is, I think, an increasing lean on national organisations to reach out into the regions that encourage that. But I do think it needs to be done in partnership and appropriately. And also it's going to have to be Janus facing, because at the end of the day, we can talk about a National Art Gallery in Newcastle and it'll be lovely. But the museums and galleries in Newcastle, like many cities, are struggling. We haven't got enough space to store what we've got. Our buildings are leaking energy. These big Victorian flour mills are not exactly eco-friendly to run. And we're now at a stage, whether it's the Baltic or whether it's the Lowry, their energy bill is more than their NPO. So we're going to need to think really carefully where we do see new cultural investment in the Northeast, things like Culture House in Sunderland. How do we future-proof these cultural institutions? How do we make sure that we're not just going to take on more assets, going to cause more liabilities for our combined authorities, for arts councils going forward? And that, again, is going to be about thinking about how we onboard our national partners, but also how we embed that cross-sector delivery of those projects from inception as well.
I think there's also rumblings now, aren't there, of struggling local authorities being in an asset sale situation again, having already been through that in sort of 2011. I guess, we've got quite a broad theme here. And Henry, I'm just thinking this is kind of culture and knowledge. And without putting you too much on the spot, just wondered, how useful is it having, and maybe I don't know whether it necessarily applies to North of Tyne, I don't know, forgive my ignorance, but how useful is it having a relocated bit of the government in your patch? Does it result in stronger relationships? Because I guess there's probably a yes and no to that, but...
I would give so if you're referring to, for example, the Darlington campus,
exactly, yeah.
The British Treasury associated economic teams within government, I would give a classic, as I'm sat in a university, a classic university answer, which is probably a bit too early to tell. but absolutely,
which is what the last FT article on it said.
Yeah. We could do a job swap. Really. I think it's a positive thing. I think that the intention behind the Treasury relocation, if you take out all of the politics and the spin, is it right to think about a multipolar department that was previously, as Karen said, absolutely locked into Threadneedle Street? Yes. Is it a good thing that senior staff that are decision-making are relocated into it and encouraged to join? Yes. Is it a good thing that that team is encouraged to think about wider regeneration in the region that it's sat in? Yes. Does that solve the whole problem? Absolutely not. But I think it's a positive thing, and I'd absolutely support that. And if you look at even at it's a slightly different thing, but the effect of public sector relocation in terms of how our towns and city centres live and thrive, you can see some really positive effects of that too. So Pilgrim Street in Newcastle will be a really, really interesting example of that, where you've got the thick end of 10,000 public servants that weren't in the city centre relocating into it. The spin-off benefit of that to the Granger Market down the road, for example, or the art galleries that we just talked about, you would expect to be really positive. So I'm really supportive and will be pushing for more of that. The flip side of that is the people. So why shouldn't our people have opportunities to go and work at the Treasury without having to get on a train and then spend 10 years in London and never see the region again? I mean, come on now. We absolutely need to shorten that access. So for those two reasons, I think it's a good thing.
There's a kind of, in my kind of media world, the example that I always use is the sort of small C cultural stuff that's very difficult to quantify. So the difference that I see as a result of programming coming from Salford as well as coming from London would be very difficult to measure on a spreadsheet. And so you have all these debates, which kind of died down a little bit now, but after the sort of first 10 years of Media City, you had all these headlines kind of saying, and it cost this amount, and it didn't employ that many people, and these people here are still really poor. And yes to all of that, but also all of this other stuff as well, including things that are very hard to measure, including, you just kind of know that the people that are commissioning programs have gone outside in a different part of the country and seen a slightly different thing, and they've got stuck on a really bad rail service or like whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that stuff is actually quite hard to measure, but it's cultural stuff though, isn't it? Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe you can evaluate it. I can't. That's your job.
So, Jim, there's a related point here about public money and private money, and what is going to drive the region's prosperity in future. And I kind of go back to, I don't know if anybody went to the Convention of the North last year or saw any of the speeches, and it was the usual, some enlightening stuff, some Waffle Fest stuff. Well, every conference is like that, isn't it? But there was a segment where beaming in from Berlin was the Minister for East Germany, who talked about levelling up. So the framing of the whole thing was about levelling up. And he talked about levelling up. And we were all sat there watching this with mayors and council leaders and public sector people. And the point at which he said, yes, and we really undercooked the public sector contribution to that. I mean, it was only 20 billion a year for the first 20 years. And of course, all of our jaws dropped and went, oh my God, where do we sign? But I guess the point I'm making is we can't be in a position where we think that public money is going to solve the problems of the region. It is not going to close the health inequality gap. It is not going to, in and of itself, create prosperity in our urban or rural parts of the region. What it can do is provide a bit of risk capital to crowd in much more activity from our private and social sectors in the cultural space, in other spaces too. And culture is absolutely fundamental to that. And making sure there's private investment in culture in the region is just as important as the public bit.
Did you want to come back?
I was just going to say something about relocation, which I think is where the question started. And I think from a national policy perspective, it can look very attractive. And you think you move the Treasury, there's a spike in house prices, it might do this, might do that. But if the policy isn't about genuine redispersal and about shifting the asset base and the value of that, then it's slightly tokenistic. I think that's my concern about it. I think it has to be a lot more substantial. Otherwise, your relocated bit of whatever cultural institution becomes the poor relation in the end, if that asset base isn't actually shifted with it.
A question, I guess, that is about the geography of the Northeast, the kind of identity geography and the economic geography of it, in that you now have a really big footprint that's coming through in this devolution deal, right? And it's unusual compared to other places that I've seen get deals, in that you've got your cities, you've got your former mining communities, you're across a very, very big area and very strong identities across that. And I guess the parallel that I would draw when I've been kind of looking at this stuff in other parts of the north of England is probably Lancashire, actually, where really, really kind of very strongly held identities in each part. And then the question is, can you then make that hang together? And that stuff is culture too, right? I think somebody else said this at the beginning, that that all constitutes the culture of the northeast of England. So I guess my question is, are we optimistic that this is something that can hang together? And it's a genuine question. I'm not being facetious, because it is unlike any other kind of part of the country that I guess that this has been tried across. I maybe start with. I was going to go to you actually, because obviously the project that you're in charge of and the work that you do, that's very, very strong identity involved there, right?
Hugely, and it goes across sort of the boundaries of County Durham. It goes to it's the Coalfield, it's Sunderland, it's Gateshead, it's South Tyneside, it's bits of Tees Valley, and we don't even have Yorkshire to hate either, so we're already one behind Lancashire in that. There's a phrase, and again, I'd be interested to know if it's sort of used more broadly, but again, Durham Coalfield thing of when you ask someone where they're from, you say, where do ye belong? And there's this thing of belonging, and that, in my experience, can be from one street to another, never mind one local authority to another. So I think it's a challenge, but I also think that there are things that bind us. I think there are shared histories. There are lots of similarities in the challenges faced in rural communities in Northumberland with the rural communities in the west of County Durham. You're talking about part of County Durham there that has a footprint that is just over half of the geography of the county and the population of less than Durham City. So we can learn a lot from Northumberland in again, just making sure that actually we manage that in a way that is equitable and that reflects difference. And I think that's the thing. It's about allowing for difference and creating a framework in which that's actually all right.
Yeah, and I guess within that, universities are going to be key as well, aren't they, as anchor institutions in helping to knit together a new landscape. I mean, an old landscape, but also a new landscape.
I think that's absolutely right, but nevertheless, our universities, Sunderland, Northumbria, Newcastle, Durham, we're in kind of fairly metropolitan nodes, and I think what Nick is alluding to is the bit that I think worries all of us the most, which is huge and not very densely populated rural hinterland with atrocious public transport links. So the sort of the disengagement and the disenfranchisement is built into the absolutely abominable public transport that we have in the county. And I think we're going to have to work very hard. And I think particularly, Elizabeth, we understand that down here to knit that together with the sort of vibrant metropolitan bits of Newcastle and everything that goes on, and articulate a narrative which is, can be immensely positive about the sheer geographical variety and opportunity and how, we've got wonderful coastline, we've got Teesdale and we've got cities, but I think that is going to take some work. I think your point, Nick, about accent and language, though, is important. I think it's a hard thing to talk about, and I don't share the accent, as you can tell. But actually, it is quite binding. I think linguistic habits, ways of talking. My husband's from Northern Ireland. We talk about all the time, the ways in which, across religious divides, a way of speaking and words and a way of pronouncing things and habits of language are very cohesive in some ways. And I think there are other less tangible ways in which we are bound, but the geographical reality is the geographical reality. And it's going to take a lot of investment from Henry to it's all about you. But it's a big part. It's a big part of the phase one of the Devo deal is really to look at transport infrastructure and how we can connect with each other, because it's just a key enabler the cohesion of the region, and universities will probably have less of a role to play in that than some of the other things.
I've never spent so much time talking about community transport networks as I have during the City of Culture bid, because there was no point putting anything on if everybody couldn't get to it. And that to me was, it's one of the reasons why Red Hills was round the table on that bid. That community transport is absolutely vital to all of this.
Yeah, it's fundamental to any of it, right?
Again, it's equity.
Yeah.
Because you'd think, but then, the bane of my life is when we have Shakespeare North opened and people can get there, but they can't get home after the show. And Eden Project North is going to be in Morecambe, which is wonderful, but there's no way to get there on public transport past certain times or on certain days. So although we might think about transport as being this very separate portfolio, it's actually integral to us to be able to deliver culture that is equitable and that is accessible. Because often, if we're in a situation now where we've got some institutions in Newcastle where you can get on the metro for free, if you've got a theatre ticket, for example, to try and stop you driving in the city centre, those kind of initiatives need to be rewarded and rolled out. And they need to be at the heart of cultural planning for new organisations and institutions. Because ultimately, like I said at the top, if you then retrofit the same structures, you get the same structural inequalities emerging in kind of these new contexts. So I'd hope that through having this closer working in the Devo deal, those portfolios will work closer together in terms of planning and delivery and identify those pinch points, particularly if you want to do more things like mega events. If you want Taylor Swift to head here, if you want Beyonce and the Beyonce effect to head back to Sunderland again, we're going to need as much transport planning as we are.
Why would you need Taylor Swift when you got me on the panel? Surely.
Well, it's all about you, I know, but I still don't think you can get her Swifties in. But that economic evaluation thing, going back to what Georgia was saying, is key to this, because when you've got to make an ask of transport, you need the data. And the thing with policy making here is rubbish in, rubbish out. And we are not good at data. We haven't got the open access systems. We haven't got the kind of infrastructure. And there's plans at the moment for us to pilot this with DCMS, hopefully in the combined authority, around a data pilot to do that for culture. But culture's in desperate need of transversal data, everything from education and skills through to transport, through to health and well-being, to make its case for its value and its return.
Yeah, and transport too.
Massively.
I mean, the argument that goes over and over and over again about why do we need better buses? Because actually but we haven't got the data to actually, yeah, exactly. I'm imagining you probably want to, or both of you want to come in with whoever.
Well, I'm just going to make quite a quick point, and it relates to culture and transport, because my personal belief is that there are some things we have to let go of. And in our rural communities, buses just don't work. They are not sustainable in terms of numbers of people wanting to use them. And we need a different method of enabling transport to make people be able to move around. It's no good that they can only come into Durham City or get to Newcastle. That's not good enough.
I remember what's it called? It's like a different type of commissioning. Is it coastal
on-demand transport, yeah. And I think that's what the conversation that we need to start very soon is about, how we could implement something that's workable, affordable, and that helps people.
No, I think don't make me mansplain. They were great answers.
I think I might throw it out to the floor. I'm sure lots of people have got questions. Where are our friends with microphones? We'll just... so there's a gentleman there with the glasses. And if you could just introduce who you are, and if there's anyone in particular on the panel you're directing your question to, then say so. Otherwise, I will just randomly pick a victim.
Okay, thanks. I'll take advantage of my proximity to the microphone. My name's Simon James. I'm an academic at Durham University, but with some research interest in this area too. It's great to hear such a united front, particularly in light of Katie's really important point about co-production. I wonder if any of the panel would like to reflect on how those of us here tonight could help carry that message from the choir here to the people not in the room, to those who think of the arts as a dispensable luxury or a nice to have, or who think of science degrees, much as we love them as well, as the only pathways to employability for young people, and so on. How do we reach the people that aren't here? Thank you.
Anybody else? I'll take three. At the front here. Sorry. Oh, okay. No, yeah.
Hi, I'm Louise. I'm a student here at Durham. I'm from Doncaster myself, so very close to mining relations. My dad was a miner, and I have interest in this research in terms of arts-based interventions, in terms of alleviating violence in like northern sectors. My question is for you, in how do we mobilise the community and young people to get over an inferiority complex in mining towns in order to effectively lead cultural regeneration in more of a practical sense? So yeah.
I'm going to. This lady is Jane, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Jane Robinson from Newcastle University. Brilliant to hear all the panels speaking so positively about the opportunities. Question for me would be for the panel, in terms of devolution, what does success look like? And also, is there an opportunity for us to redefine how we measure success away from traditional economic outputs?
Yeah. So I will, maybe it was for Nick. Do you want to, your question was for Nick, right? Yeah. Do you want to start off?
Hi Louise, good to meet you. Thanks for the question. I'll have a go at answering it. I think it is about opportunity. It's about ensuring that there are pathways that are about being the absolute best that you can be in whatever area you're interested in. Red Hills, the building, I'll keep doing the greatest hits, but essentially it's a statement. It was built as a demonstration of collective worth. It represents aspiration and it represents entitlement, as I say. There's a project that we're a partner in Horden, which is one of the last pit villages where the colliery closed. And Mark, the artistic director of the Isango Ensemble from Cape Town, is coming in to work with and establish a company of touring theatre makers in Horden, thanks to the support of the Arts Council. That's what we're worth. If, as Mark said earlier today to the circuit leadership panel for the local Methodist church who we were meeting with, if we're in the Olympics, we're going for gold. And for so long, I grew up, I was born during the miners' strike and 40th anniversary this year. I grew up with no conception of what I'd lost. All I grew up with was anger, grief, resentment, and no theoretical understanding of where any of that emotion had come from. And then understanding my own history later in life allowed me to realise actually that had existed. I was being denied this almost. Not to sort of sound confrontational about it, but it existed within living memory. So we have to aspire to recreating something that is gold standard. And so working with something like Isango Ensemble, globally touring, if there's an award to win, they've won it. And where do they want to work? Anywhere on planet Earth. They want to work in East Durham, in Horden, with the local Methodist church.
So I'm going to jump to Jane's question, which is basically about what success looks like under devolution, which I dare say quite a few of you might have thoughts on. You may have even written it into a document.
Can I invite other people to answer that, and then I'll have a go at how that calibrates to what we've written down?
Okay, I'll go to Karen.
I'm sure Henry would agree. There's a really, really long answer to Jane's question around a whole bunch of success measures, which would be around prosperity, health outcomes, engagement, democratic uptake. But I'm an educator, and I would say if I had one success measure, because all the others follow, it'd be around educational attainment. If people are succeeding educationally, they're healthier, they're more likely to stay in the region, they generate more prosperity. So I would put that as my number one success measure, and the others would follow.
And do you think there is a need to redefine away from what is traditionally used as success measure at the moment? Or
there absolutely is, and I think we all understand that, and that's a big debate about primary school curricula and what we teach in FE, and especially FE. Actually, for me, that's the most that's the sector that is in the biggest need of investment and attention, and there's a clear need to define outcomes in terms of secondary education, in terms of skills, as well as in terms of subject content. So that we could have a very long debate about that, but a general pattern of educational uplift, which starts with staying in school. It starts with retention. It starts with not lower rates of absenteeism and greater progression through the various key stages. So, it's a big debate, and we have a very expert education department in this university that does that evidence-based assessment of outcomes brilliantly. But I would always put educational attainment, however you measure it, front and centre.
Go on, tell me what's in your document.
The non-bureaucratic answer, change the habit of a lifetime. I promise I've got some really good ones with numbers in them. Numbers of jobs, GVA, closing health inequality gaps, educational outcomes for people. I've got 2 boys who are 8 and 10 years old, and I want them to grow up and think, it's here, man. I'm staying here because all the action's here in the Northeast. Yeah. This is where I want to be.
Do you think generally there is a need to are you going to need to, as a region, to look at to define success differently to how it's traditionally been defined?
100%. I mean, you can't in this region, you may see this anywhere, but the idea that the social life and the public services and, if you like, the communities and their health in this region is distinct from how the economy performs is for the birds, isn't it? You've heard what Nick said. Yeah. We cannot have a model that is about stacking them high in the urban centre and waiting for it to bleed out into the suburbs and the countryside. It's just not going to work. So it requires us to be really clear about what our investment's for, and really clear that that's a social and an environmental and a health as well as an economic return. It's absolutely vital.
We're having this conversation earlier on that the point of devolution is supposed to be that different places can do things differently according to what the place is like, right? And not kind of necessarily rolled out off a conveyor belt because Manchester did it that way. Giorgio, do you have any thoughts on defining success for North East?
So Jane asked something very distinctive, not in economic terms. And I'm an economist, so I can think of 12 ways to measure the economic. But if I had to think about a non-economic way to measure it, it would be in terms of equality of opportunity and empowerment. And it's this idea, I think, that people can determine their own future by themselves, with their own efforts. And it's a belief that you need to have in order to achieve anything in life. So the idea that you may be in a disadvantaged position really already puts you at disadvantage in terms of achieving anything in life. So I think it's quality opportunity. Education clearly plays a role. Public institutions, the social infrastructure, even transportation plays a role, I guess. But these are all inputs. I think I was struck by what Nick said in terms of this intergenerational transmission of something that you didn't experience, but somebody else's, this trauma, I would say. Mm-hmm. So I think, how do we get out of this trauma? I think generating a positive story, empowering people, making sure that there is equality of opportunity. Many of these things are achieved through economic means, but not uniquely through economic means.
Simon's question on co-production and how do you get that message about culture out to people outside of this room, including people who might not necessarily get it? Thoughts?
Well, you can't Trojan horse it, right? You've got to walk people over that line hand in hand. And the best thing about co-creation, as you well know as an expert in it, is that it's a huge amount of networking. It's about knowledge exchange. It's about adopting different ways of working, taking something that works in one sector and bringing it into another. And a lot of it is about play. And I always say that when you bring those stakeholders together in a room, it's like watching, my goddaughter when she was 3 navigate her way around the toys at playgroup, because everyone scopes each other out, and then they all come together and they find a problem with that and they leave it, and then they go and play with something that works, and they all kind of negotiate their own roles and what they want out of it. And that's what we all do. And co-production means everybody having skin in the game, but it also will mean our national policymakers having skin in the game. It also means our ALBs having skin in the game. It means our universities having skin in the game as well, and our cultural sector organisations and leaders having skin in the game. So for me, the co-production element of devolution is core, because if you get that right at source, it should bleed through. Right? If that is your model of operating, if that is your modus operandi, it should bleed through everything. And therefore you should feel like you're bringing everybody on the journey with you, and that it's a shared journey. I think it's really important we have some signposts in the road on that journey so we know what success looks like, and we can hold ourselves accountable and not just be held accountable to central government to say, have we achieved what we want to achieve in the first 100 days? What does the first year look like? Because the huge opportunity here, which we've never had as a region. I was like Nick, I had to go away. I was a kid of the miners' strike. I'm sick of Dick Whittington syndrome, where my graduates have to go away to get a job in culture and the creative industries. This will be the first generation where I can show my students an editor on campus. I can show my students a publishing house in Newcastle. Like, this is major, because that role modelling means you can see it, you can be it, it's present, it's here on the ground. It's not just in London, it's not exclusive. So I think that co-production element means us working closer with industry as well, to get them up here, to show them what's up here, to show them our talent, to show them our resources, and to plug them into all the opportunities of the investment funds and the knowledge base for our organisations. But it's going to mean our research funders, and I'm not sitting here with a research hat and saying this, looking at more inclusive models of innovation as well. Who can bid for research funding? Get your freelancers in, get your SMEs in. So we're going to need to think about how we develop the next generation of research funding as well to do that.
Probably a separate panel discussion. Yeah. More questions. Okay, there's a lady here in the blue at the front. Oh, well, yes.
Hello, I am Gośka Bialek. I live in Durham 32 years, and I did many different things, that I worked for Durham when I was scientist. After that, I changed my interest, and I started to work with art. And in the end, I did, PhD in art. But why I'm talking about this? Because I really cover quite.
Hold the microphone.
I cover quite, big, field. Yes.
Okay.
And now, Durham is very important for me. And for example, because everything what was said, I really can see that it's happened or it is, going like this. Education, I think, this is main thing, but Durham, had much easier situation that if we compare with Sunderland, Newcastle, I can see, this journey, what's happened in Sunderland or Newcastle, but I think we have to teach people also about respect to education. That they could feel, that it's worth to do this and they needed this, because really this is what I notice, very often, or I hear that they don't really bother, But another thing is, because I have two questions.
Do you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah. That this question is to Nick Mann. That, for example, this would be, for me, define, situation, yes? How do you see future of Miners Red Hill and the association? Because we have to remember that, we don't see anymore, miners when they come, August or...
There are no more mines, but there are lots of mining communities, and there will continue to be mining communities. We're a generation on from the closure of the last pit 30 years ago this year, from the decommissioning of Wearmouth Colliery. Red Hills the point of Red Hills is to find a way of doing the thing it's always done, but related to 21st century needs. So what Red Hills is it's an example. It's an inspiring building. It's a beautiful building with an inspiring history.
Monument, yes.
But it's a platform. It's a platform from which we can, so again, back to Louise's question earlier, we'll have a youth parliament, which is sort of working with partners, some of whom are in the room, to ensure that we teach the agency, the confidence, the skills that enable young people to stand up and say what's relevant to them. The things that are relevant to them, they tell us over and over again, doesn't matter who we work with, climate change, mental health and well-being, representation, the fact that they are paid less than their peers for doing the same job because of the way that the minimum wage is broken down. Our job is to create that platform. That's all we have to do. Create and hold that space for them to follow in the footsteps of an inspiring history of self-determined, community-led decision-making. And so Red Hills will do that, and it'll do it through heritage, it'll do it through arts, it'll do it through conferencing, it'll do it, but it will turn its purpose to what is required by those mining communities in whatever year it is.
How you would use, this building? This is what I ask.
How?
Because usual when I am there, when I was there, because I visit this building because it's beautiful, it was empty.
Yes, and that's the journey that we're on, because you used to need a letter to get through the front door, and now that's not the case. But
there's a gentleman here, yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Can I just say I love the optimism for the North East. I'm Adam Shani, I work for the City of Durham Parish Council. And Henry, you may know that last year, tourism brought in over £1 billion for our county alone for the first time ever. Now, we should be singing about that. And I remember the culture bid actually timed brilliantly with the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, which was a series of events that my organisation took a lead on, and it was just a great time to be alive in Durham. And we've got a real culture champion, I think, in our county in Elizabeth Scott. But Henry mentioned earlier that the order has now hit Parliament. That means that there's a North East mayor role that needs filling. Elizabeth, have you got your application in?
Oh my goodness me. Right, we'll take 4 questions, I think, this time. There's a gentleman at the back at the top here.
Hi, I'm Robert Clark. I was a history and politics student at Leicester, and I've recently moved to Durham. And my question's got a bit of a preamble, so sorry about that. But and I don't know who to direct it at, so also sorry about that. But I guess, well, it was said earlier that we don't really have haven't in the past had regional developments. And that's kind of true, but also not, because we had the county readjustments in the 70s and they failed and were all taken back. And they failed.
When you say, I don't know what.
In the 70s.
No, I know. But what was it that was said earlier about not having regional development?
On this man on the ramp. Sorry, I don't know your name.
It's okay, Georgia.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
But it was said that the regions don't have their own local governments and things like that.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
And in a sense that's correct, but in a sense it's also, I would argue, not correct. And it has been tried to tweak before. And obviously things like Humberside and things like that, these county experiments of connecting places that then didn't want to be connected, they fell apart. And they fell apart, quite frankly, because of culture. And I think the question I want to ask based off that is, how can it be justified to then ask questions of culture when fundamentally I think that's the reason why those experiments failed in the past, experiments like the devolution of today. So why not focus instead primarily on economics, as has been, in fairness, discussed quite a lot after I thought of this question.
Well, I think the panel discussion is about largely.
I know, but how can that? So, my question is, how can that be justified?
But it isn't, is it? Well, because we haven't divorced it from economics, though.
Well, I'm not saying it was
we've all made is that the things are all interconnected.
My point is that culture will always come, but it seems that this is a discussion of culture coming from above, rather than
so you're saying it's
the economics. I'm saying why isn't economics prioritized over the culture? And that's my question. Is that a fair question?
Okay, I will. I don't know who wants to. Do you want to come in on that? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I will say something about that, because I fundamentally don't really agree in terms of, I think, what's already been said about culture and economics being separate entities, because they aren't. But also, I worked in Newcastle for the City Council 25 years ago in economic development. And I can tell you, we wouldn't be having this sort of a conversation now. We were nowhere near having the political maturity to even want to all be in the same room and talking to each other. So that has been a major shift, I would say, in a generation. And the fact that we are now doing that is what really gives me hope that we do have an opportunity here to work together in a much more fundamental way.
So hopefully that's the case.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would add to that, I think it's absolutely spot on, is, you don't move a muscle on devolution without a really strong political mandate to do that. And these things are developed through deals. So there's a government side to that. There is a regional side to that. So there's nothing that has been imposed on the region that hasn't been done through really strong collaboration within that region. I made a bit of a meal of that, but you know what I mean. It's not top down. We asked for this deal to be done, and actually that is a big credit to the political team across the region, because as Liz has said, that's not always been the case, and that's really quite different to what's gone before, I think.
More questions? Okay. So there's a gentleman here, and a gentleman there. And can we have some more women, please? Yeah, lady at the back. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Pip Fallow. I wrote a book called Dragged Up Proper, and it's, I know this has been talked about on TV and stuff like that. My question's based a little bit on what this guy was on about here. It's not an economics versus culture question. It's just, I think it's Nick has touched on Sid Chapman and his ethos earlier. His ethos was more along the lines of, instead of cultural-led regeneration, that the culture in the golden days of Nick, what Nick deals with is the culture came from industry. You paid a tanner out your wages, and that paid for the local cricket team, that paid for the local dance hall, and paid for you. And I hadn't heard the word reindustrialization. I know it's a cultural thing that you're talking about, and we haven't heard reindustrialization. We've heard, Beamish, we've heard heritage, culture. We've heard treasury location in the northeast. We haven't heard, we've heard the word deindustrialization once from Nick. We need reindustrialization. I'm from Blackhall. The people there aren't leaving because they can't get a role in Shakespeare. They're leaving because they can't make things. They're packing a bag and going away to get a job and not staying with their families and never coming back because they can't build things, they can't manufacture things. What is devolution? And it's probably a question for you. What is devolution going to do to get us reindustrialized?
It was actually, I had something related on my list of questions actually, and then I thought I've talked too much. So I'm glad I'm glad somebody's asked something in relation to reindustrialization. Can we just take a few more questions and then we'll come back? Could you stick all your hands up again? There's a lady with a mask right in the back up there. And we'll come to you. Yeah. Sorry, I'm making you get your steps in.
Is this on? Yeah. So I'm an art historian. Do I need to turn it? Oh, okay. Right. I see. So I'm an art historian. I've lived in Durham for about 5 years and intend to keep living here. So my question is quite simple, which is how the panel, thank you for all you've given us tonight, and the panel talked a lot about how we need to get towards something distinct. Well, it sort of touched on how we need to get something distinctive for the Northeast and maybe and I kind of think it's important to move culture away from general entertainment and make it distinctive and make it Northeast. And so my question is, how do we make more of the Northeast's early medieval past, which is so incredible and unlike anything anywhere else in the entire country? The age of Bede, the age of Cuthbert, it's all here. The history of Britain's history so much of Britain's history is located here. But I don't always see that being made a feature of. How do we do more of that?
How do you capitalise on it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And then there's a gentleman here right in the middle of the third row who's been waiting very patiently. Sorry, no, sorry. This with the dark blue with the zip. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a student at Durham. I just wanted to pick up on the point that was made by Simon in the audience earlier about sort of spreading the word. And I think what I was wondering was how much optimism should we really be deriving from devolution, given the national picture for arts and culture at the moment? I think particularly we look at local government, for example, and how when kind of under funding pressures, local libraries have often been the first to the chop. And if we look at higher education, look at Roehampton, Wolverhampton, Sheffield Hallam cutting back arts and humanities courses, how much importance should we really be placing on devolution when really the national picture for grassroots arts and culture is still looking bleak because it's not given enough political importance at either a national or local level?
Yeah. So to start with reindustrialisation, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned reindustrialisation earlier in relation to the Four Wall development, because people tend to think and conceptualise of culture and the creative industries as being about acting and being about, the glamour of film. Actually, 80% of the jobs in that Four Wall studio are sparks or joiners or hair and makeup. They're not graduate jobs, right? They're not manufacturing either, but we've got advanced manufacturing opportunities now as a result of Devo that we would not have had. Like Nissan workers have for the first time in living memory 10 years stability of jobs that they would not have had without the investment zone that landed with Devo. Now, no system is perfect, but anything that gives us more long-term stability than cap in hand every 2-3 years having to go back with our employers and say, do we have enough support to do this next phase, is got to be a good thing. And I think any big major investment from, like Henry was saying with FDI or any inward investment into the Northeast needs stability, needs assurance, and needs us as higher education institutions to service it in a joined up way from early years all the way through to post-compulsory. So we need a coherent curriculum, a creative curriculum, but one that will allow people different ways in through various jobs. That culture isn't all about the performing arts and the people on the stage. It's 99% the stuff that goes on behind that. And as soon as you start unlocking those jobs for people and for a new generation, my accountancy students are more likely to work in a film studio perhaps than my drama students, right? Because they're in desperate demand for accountants for productions. But it's about how we do our careers education piece. And obviously, there's always going to be a place for manufacturing in the Northeast. It's, the subject of our investment zone. But alongside that, we can be a site of creative production as well. And I think if you look at the Sunderland example of how you reindustrialise that river that my dad built ships on for his entire life, is now going to be building something very, very different in a sustainable way and hopefully providing jobs for the next generation.
I think it's maybe also about defining knowledge, right? So we talk about knowledge in terms of higher education, but as you said earlier, Karen, the bit that doesn't really get talked about as much is further education, but the kinds of skills that we're talking about for reindustrialisation, a lot of those are going to come through a further education system that's kind of on its knees and has been kind of Cinderella's service of education, it seems to me, for quite some time. And I think there is a bit more purchase over further education as part of the devolution deal. Well, there has been in others. I know less about where you're going to go with it. You want to come in on medieval history?
With apologies to the historians in the room. But yes, the question about the identity of the Northeast being tied to that sort of early medieval Christian heritage in particular, there's a really, really good example of how we work as a region on that, which is the Northern Saints Trails. So the Northern Saints Trails were launched, I think just pre-COVID, but that was a collaboration between all of the destination development organisations in the northeast of England to establish something that benefits every part of the map. So I'd say there's an example there of something that appropriately enough builds on the research that Durham University is a leader in, but that delivers a direct economic benefit in those areas and speaks to the identity of the place.
Do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely our medieval heritage has a fantastic role to play in terms of tourism and defining a really wonderful history for the region as a centre of knowledge generation since 1,000 years ago, and we like to talk that up. But I think there's another aspect to this, which is there's a skill sector associated with the heritage economy. We're working a lot on that at Durham. So skilled stonemasons, all of the kind of things that go towards maintaining and sharing that heritage economy that I think it's not huge. It's pre-industrial skills, if I can put it that way. And we're talking about reindustrialization, but nevertheless, it's important, and it's very important in York as well. I've noticed, that can be quite an area of employment. Just on reindustrialization, I mean, it's not the theme of this panel, but I think we're all very aware of the manufacturing sectors that are doing well and not so well in the region. We are a region that has proportionally more SMEs and proportionally lower R&D investment within our businesses and into our region. That's been a massive part of the many conversations that I've had and others have had with Henry around the Devo deal and the opportunity of devolution. So it's not present in this room, but let me assure you, universities, NEMCA, all of us are thinking about that reindustrialization opportunity. What industrialization means in a world of AI and quantum technologies, near space research, and all of the things that we're doing in the universities in partnership with regional and national and actually global businesses. So, and then of course there's the clean energy sector, which is amazing in this region, and we have major companies from Denmark and Norway and Singapore who are big players in the renewable energy sector. So we've got a lot going on, but that's perhaps not integral to the discussion we're having today, but it is absolutely integral to the discussions we have as a group of universities in terms of R&D, tech transfer, IP, and the role we can play in reindustrialization in the Northeast. So I just wanted to say that because it's not today's discussion, but it goes without saying that it's a massive focus for universities.
Did you want to come in here?
Yes, if I can. Sorry. So I actually partly disagree in the sense that, going back to the point that the gentleman was making, as clearly I'm research director for a center that has at its core policy and evidence for the creative industries. I think it's important to highlight the role that creativity has in the creative industries, but also outside the creative industries and in traditional manufacturing potentially too. So going back to making the case for the value of culture and the value of creativity, there's massive value in creativity unlocking innovation in other sectors that are not just necessarily considered creative, or sectors that are both creative and technological. So there is often the use of the word createch, for example, in this context. So I think that's an important factor. When you think about the role of devolution, if I can go back maybe to the question that Jane made, there's a success. How would you measure success as an economist now, probably, or as somebody who's trying to influence with research policymaking? I think better policies. I think if through devolution the Northeast is able to formulate better policies, then there will be a massive success. Because clearly, what has led to failure of past policies must have been that probably they were not necessarily well conceived. So I think better policy making. So there are examples of failures from the past. I agree, but you're looking at 30 probably years of, or 50 maybe, of lack of representation and local policy making. So I think that's the opportunity created by devolution, but it has to be taken forward with proper evidence and policy making. And that's what essentially the center that I'm very proud to be part of is geared to do.
Gentleman here asked a question about whether we should be optimistic given the national landscape. Did you want to come in on that?
Actually, I was going to pick up.
Oh, were you coming in on
both
right,
those
okay.
points about might?
Well, I'll answer that. No. Sorry. This is not being recorded, is it?
I'm going to tell a very quick story that a couple of people have heard, so I apologise. But when I was first in this job, one particular day I was in the cathedral having a behind-the-scenes tour, and I was looking at St Cuthbert's belt that is exhibited there, and the very fine gold threads that you can still see in the belt. And the next day I was in a lab-based business who was making components for the space sector. And looking through a very intense magnifying glass, you could see the very, very tiny gold threads used to join up bits of that I don't even understand. And that is actually a very powerful story about Durham and what Durham has to offer. And what culture does, though, Pip, is raises that profile. We've just had some perceptions work done about County Durham. We've asked people from all over the country, and I was very keen to have this done, what they know about Durham. Nout is the answer, right? So things like, our cultural heritage and all of those things and arts and everything can raise our profile and can make the difference between an international company wanting to come and locate here and not. So that's why, to me, it's so important.
And is any thoughts on how devolution sits within that bigger picture of, the reality of central government spending and what's happening to to local government, which is completely fraying around the edges at the moment? I mean, there's a tension there, right? I mean,
there is a reality, which is you need both things to be firing on all cylinders. So devolution cannot work if you have the systematic defunding of the constituent parts of the devolution deal. Just can't. So I think, I'm saying this on behalf of my local government colleagues as well as the combined authority. You need a sustainable economy. You need to invest in that. You also need sustainable public services. You can't have one thriving without the other. It is absolutely and always true. So I think we need to see that whoever forms the next government is a real focus on both of those things.
We've probably got time for maybe 2 more questions. You have a lady right there, so that's convenient.
Hello, my name is Fiona O'Carroll. I work at the International Office here at Durham University. I just had a question, I guess, relating to the fact we all know that we live in an interconnected world, and I don't think we can think locally anymore without also thinking or looking globally. We all know across our universities, we've got a great diversity of cultures within our student and staff populations, as well, of course, as in the wider populations. I've seen firsthand how international experiences can really raise aspirations, particularly in young people. William mentioned about the confidence building that can come about from international partnership. And so I just wanted to ask the panel how they saw these communities contributing to the cultural regeneration that we all want to see going forward.
And maybe just one more, and you're going to force me to choose. I think this gentleman here was the best. Oh, I'm so sorry. Can I just jump forward a little bit, because I think you've had your hand up for quite a while, haven't you? Have you not? Okay, right, well, we'll go back. Sorry, I was trying to be really fair, so no, and you didn't want to ask anything. That's fine.
This is on, I assume, yes. Thanks. It's Andrew Gray, and I work as an archivist in the library and collections here. Declare an interest because I'm also a mayoral candidate. So yes, it's amazingly exciting that order's finally happening, and we haven't all been wasting our time. But my question is, I hope nothing to do with that, and probably directed a bit at Karen, but and you've touched, several of you have touched on this and given some examples. So I'd just like you to kind of repeat or perhaps answer sort of more directly. How do we get traditionally a lot of cultural engagement, a lot of engagement with the collections that we look after, amazing medieval collections, as well as fantastic stuff relating to the history of County Durham. How do we engage with those kinds of collections, those kinds of heritage assets in a way that's more impactful than it traditionally has been, that goes beyond the retired professionals of Durham City, goes beyond people that look like me and perhaps most of you, and actually really reaches deep. And then we've had some hints, we've had some good examples already said. So I'm actually optimistic about this, not pessimistic, but how do we get that impact right down into our communities? We know we've got the collections relating to those communities, relating to the heritage, relating to amazing histories, but how do we kind of get them in there most effectively?
Could I just ask the lady to clarify your question? Do you mean other communities elsewhere? How no?
Well, not necessarily. Sorry. I think both, yes. I think we have a lot to gain from our international partnerships. We all have across the universities, but also locally as well. But also our communities, whether they be temporary or based here in the Northeast, have a huge amount to contribute to this agenda. So just
how do we get different communities to be?
Exactly.
Okay, that's fair. Just on the second point, I think that was partly directed at you, possibly.
I think it was explicitly
entirely directed at you.
think with Fiona's questions, so I think just starting from the truism that social mobility is also geographical mobility, and we have communities in the county and in the region who don't own passports, don't travel, don't have a mental picture of a global world. And then we have global businesses, Fujitsu, all kinds of people, Nissan, working in the region who come from somewhere else. And then we also have museums and collections like our Oriental Museum represented here that speak of other cultures, other histories. And there are ways that we already do, but could do with more resource, even more powerfully, of joining all of those dots. So just to be very kind of Durham specific, we have the most phenomenal learning engagement team working across our museums, and they bring primary school kids from every primary school in the county into the museum, and they talk about China, and they talk about India, and they talk about Korea and Japan, and they're opening out a world, I think, to those kids. Research about how impactful that is, and how you make those encounters that we all had as children, or most of us did, long-lastingly impactful, and translate into a kind of level of global awareness and global mobility is a very long journey. Durham County Council have, despite all of the financial stringencies that they have, and I complain about university finances, but local government's a whole other set of nightmares, have always maintained an international officer and capability within the county, and have always recognised that Chinese New Year or engaging schools with global awareness, even in communities where parents don't take them kids on holiday overseas, don't have passports, is really important because I think it is important for that social mobility journey that our children in our county have. But I also think, to Fiona's point, that we have an asset in all of our universities in terms of international students who hear endlessly, and staff, because 40% of our staff come from outside of the UK. We hear so many ridiculous negative stories in the press, but actually it's fantastic that we have international staff and students. International students are always the ones who step forward to volunteer, to do projects, to work in schools. There are some countries, and I would put China at the top of that list, who have a service learning ethos that's much stronger than the UK. So they come to the UK and they expect to do service learning. So there are ways in which, as universities, we're working to join all of those things up. But I think the bigger picture is around global awareness, geographical social mobility, and just that imagination of other places. And then we have to have as Elizabeth says, not buses, but transport links to make that a reality for people. But I really sincerely believe that museums can play a really positive role in that whole global to local interface.
Hello, my name is Edward, and my question really is about whether culture is always an unalloyed good. We've talked about culture being based on difference and value and history and society and economics. But culture is also where we get clashes, and we have politicians using culture to create war and sometimes foment war. How do we spot the bad actors, and might we be the baddies?
Oh my God. It's a way to go out, isn't it? Why didn't I wrap that up early? Does anyone, please, someone?
That was a great question.
You'd love to come in on that. You said it was a great question.
It's a great question because, as a sector, because we're so used to having to define our value, we're very good at defining our value in terms of being on the defensive. I think, like any great, powerful force, with great force comes great responsibility, and we become very conscious about the misuse of culture. And, if anybody ever says to me, oh, you teach storytelling, I've had that leveled at me. You teach narrative, you teach storytelling. Fake news is storytelling. Culture wars is storytelling. Every modern battle you're seeing from social media all the way through is about narrative. And so we've got a really important role, certainly in the arts and humanities, to go back to your question, to empower a new generation with the ability to own narrative and to communicate compelling narratives. Because if we don't do that, especially in the face of AI, and this reaches to everything in industry and IP, You know, if we haven't got the ownership over the story, same with devolution, and somebody else is going to step in and tell it for us. So the big thing I think with the culture wars is that it's a great sign of how much we value culture and recognise its power that people are trying to harness it for bad.
Good turnaround. And I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a really, really interesting debate, conversation. It's been an absolute delight to come to Durham. I won't wrap up, I won't list all of the points that I found fascinating from it, but I'm going to be going away and thinking an awful lot about some of the things that have been talked about this evening. Thanks to the panel. If we could get a round of applause for the panel, please.